We're taking a break from the 365 series, and through the summer we're going to do a series of talks looking at Genesis and 6 stories from Genesis. So I'm going to be doing a couple, we've got some members of the youth doing some. And so the first story from Genesis, unsurprisingly, is in Genesis 1 and is creation. I'm going to be looking at the story of creation. And before we get into the text of the story of creation, I just want to try and explain some of what's going on. Obviously, the Hebrew people, the tribe, the nation of Israel, are at this point our best understanding that this is written when they're in exile. They're in exile in Babylon. They are surrounded by other cultures, other nations, other empires with their own creation narratives. Narratives that are quite violent. Narratives where gods are at war with each other. Narratives where creation comes through chaos and destruction and violence between gods. And the Israelites write Genesis in that context, and they write Genesis as a response to these other gods that they're presented with, and say, this is the God that we worship, this is the God that we know, this is the God that is part of our history. And so they start this in Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God. Right at the beginning, right at the outset, God is involved in the creation of everything. God is before all things. God is in all things. Right at the beginning. In the beginning, God. And in the beginning, God created. So we have this God who is creator, this creative God, this creator God. He created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. It is without definition. It is without life. It is without shape. It is without space. It is without function. It is without all of these things, without definition. And darkness, it was without light. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So we have God as creator. We have God as Spirit. And we're right at the beginning here. We're just in the first 2 verses. And the Spirit of God is hovering. There's this anticipation, there's this expectation. Something is about to happen. And in verse 3 it says this, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. So in verse 1 we have God as creator. In verse 2 we have God as Spirit. In verse 3 we have God as Word. We have the Trinity in the first 3 verses of Scripture. In the first 3 verses of the Bible, in the first 3 verses of creation, we have the Trinity laid out. And this isn't a God who brings chaos out of all things. This isn't God who is destructive and violent. This is a God who speaks creation into being, who brings order out of chaos. God saw that the light was good. He separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. This poem has this refrain to it and this rhythm to it, and right at the beginning God creates time and rhythm within which all other things can exist. And then the second day, and God said that there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And so in the first day he's created time and rhythm. In the second day he creates space and definition. And then we carry on. And God said that the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and that the dry ground appear, and it was so. God called the dry ground land, and he gathered the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. And then God said that the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And in the first day he creates time and rhythm within which all things consist. In the second day he creates definition and space. And on the third day he creates land and seas. He creates this ecosystem, which is this bed of life, this seed bed of life, out of which life flows. So he's created time with him, he's created space and definition, he's created this ecosystem, and then in the following days he fills those. So God creates space and then God fills space. God said that there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, days and years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. And he made the stars. He also made the stars like a throwaway line. And there are billions and billions and billions of stars. Just in our Milky Way, there are 100 billion stars. That is enough for 12 stars for every human being on the planet, just in the Milky Way. And then there's billions of Milky Ways, as it were. And so he's created the sun and the moon and also the stars. He's filled that first space of time and rhythm. And God said that the water teem with living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the creatures of the sea, every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it according to their kinds, every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful, increase in numbers, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. And so in the same way that the first day is filled by the sun and the moon, and the space that he creates on the first day is filled by the sun and the moon and the stars, the space that he fills on the second day, which is the sky and the seas, the water above and the water below, he fills with the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky. And then on the 6th day, he creates the animals. Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, let us make man in our image. This Trinity that we see at the beginning of Creator and Spirit and Word says, let us make man in our image. This is no God who's at war with other gods, who's the center of the drama. This is the God who is the source of all creation, who creates out of harmony and unity, who creates out of love and creativity. So they make man in their image, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature. And God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. This God creates, and then he fills. This poem tells of the goodness that God creates across all creation. This God who is a creator God. And this poem is written in response to this idea that God's petty or violent or vindictive, or aggressive, or dramatic, or whatever it might be. And they tell a story of a God who is good, a God who is creative, a God who creates out of love, a God who creates out of harmony, a God who creates out of unity, a God who pours his blessing out on mankind and creates us in his image so we can be a blessing to all creation. It's a beautiful story of what God is like. And in our society today, where God sometimes is trivialized or dismissed or demonized or criticized or blamed for all sorts of things, what is the story of God that we can be telling through our lives, through our words, through our worship, that reveals to the world around us what this God is like? Let's be people who create because we're created by a creative God. Let's be people who love because we are loved by a loving God. Let's be people who reveal what God is like.